I was admitted into several reputable universities in the US, but I ultimately chose PKU. I know that a lot of people might be wondering how I did that in the first place. The way I got in is probably not what you would expect. If you don't already know, I currently attend Peking University, which is arguably one of the top universities, if not the top, in China. Although I have to say that the debate between PKU and Tsinghua is very real. But in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the exact route that I took to apply, the entrance exam route, the strict nationality rules, and what I would do differently if I could apply again. Because applying to a top university in China as an international student is quite different from applying to one in the US. At the end of the video, I'll share some advice for anybody who might be considering applying to PKU and how you should go about approaching this overall process. And there are two main pathways that you can take: the program without the written examination and the one with it. Now, I personally chose the one without the entrance exam route, but I do have friends that did actually take the written entrance exam. So I'll explain both in this video, but first starting with the route that I took. So the without written examination path is basically for students that may already have pretty strong examination scores that meet the requirements of PKU. Obviously, for every country, the standardized test scores may differ, but for me, for instance, I'm from the US, and so the standardized test scores that I used were like my SAT. You could also, I believe, submit ACT and AP scores, depending on which were higher and which met the requirements. For me, all of them did, but for different people in different countries, they might have like A-level exams, and those scores are going to be different as well. So essentially what this means is instead of flying all the way to China to sit for an entrance exam, you can use the existing exam scores that you already have from your high school or from other entities that provide certain examinations that Peking University acknowledges. And these exams are the scores that are used to determine whether you qualify for the next round in the application process. But this is the important thing. Unlike for the Gaokao entrance exam, it doesn't mean that if you have an exam score that meets their minimum requirements that you are automatically accepted into their undergraduate class. It just means that you get to skip the written test portion and automatically move on to the next step in the application process. So first, to briefly cover who can actually apply. To apply through this pathway, you have to be a non-Chinese citizen with a valid foreign passport. You need to be between 18 and 25 years old, have completed high school, be physically and mentally fit, and have no criminal record. And because the undergraduate program is taught completely in Chinese, you need to have proof of your Chinese proficiency, which is typically done through the HSK exams. When I was applying, I believed I submitted my HSK 6 level exam scores, which at the time I think probably was the highest, but I think now there are like HSK 7, 8, 9, which basically goes into very ancient Chinese scripture, which is not something that I personally have a strong grasp of, but that's besides the point. And so for those of you who are considering applying for the undergraduate programs, I do want to really emphasize how Chinese proficiency is pretty important, because if you aren't able to understand Chinese at a high enough level and use it, then you're gonna have a very difficult time in your academic courses, because at an undergraduate level, especially at one of the most prestigious universities in China, it will be very difficult to keep up if your Chinese skills just aren't at the level that they need to be at to study in such a rigorous environment. But for me, I essentially submitted my HSK 6 scores as well as my high school transcripts, which contained my GPA, my ranking, and all that jazz. And another part that a lot of people don't realize is the requirements regarding the nationality rule. Essentially, if you were born with foreign nationality, but one or both of your parents were Chinese citizens at the time of your birth, or if you used to hold Chinese nationality yourself, there are additional residency requirements. You must have obtained foreign nationality before April 30th, 2022, and you need at least 2 years of actual residence outside of China between April 2022 and April 2026. Now, of course, this is for the application cycle for 2026, and these range timeframes, date timeframes are going to vary depending on the year, but that's how it is this year, and next year they will probably just shift it slightly. If this is something that might be a concern for you in terms of whether or not you actually qualify as to apply as an international student, I would definitely take a closer look into this. But yeah, that's just something that I will double check in case you have that concern. So the reason why it's called without written examination is essentially because your national or international standardized test scores are what move you on to the next round. As I mentioned earlier, you submit your official official score report, your transcript, and your proof of Chinese proficiency. If you're finding this video helpful so far, please consider giving it a like so it can reach more people to learn about the application process at PKU. PKU actually publishes a detailed score requirement for, the different exams that they're willing to accept, as well as what you have to score on those each individual exams in order to qualify for the not written examination application. But I just really recommend that you check the official website because these requirements may change from year to year. So depending on when you're applying, you want to make sure that you're checking the correct requirements for your cycle so that you're not mixing things up or looking at the wrong requirements or standards. Beyond numbers, PKU obviously does place some emphasis on other extracurricular activities, as well as your leadership, involvement, and overall person. I think they especially place a lot of emphasis on whether or not you have like that international perspective, global perspective, as well as how well you actually know China, which is something I can cover a little bit more in an interview video if that's something you guys want to know more about, like what the actual interview process is like and how to prepare. So when you're actually ready to go and submit, everything is conducted through an online system. They have an application portal just like a lot of universities in the US do. Basically, you have to upload identification documents, which might include your passport and nationality proof. You'll also have to upload the academic materials that I mentioned earlier, and that can be done in PDF format. There are also personal material requirements, which includes 2 letters of recommendation, a personal statement, a commitment letter, and a self-introduction video. There is a video component, but I don't think it's as intimidating as some people might think it is. It's really just a quick 1 to 2 minute video where you're introducing yourself, who you are, just sharing things that maybe you've done or accomplished in high school, why perhaps you want to attend Peking University. I don't know if I still have that video that I filmed way back when, but I'm pretty sure that I had filmed it just in one shot, one go, and I don't think it's something that you need to be too stressed out about as long as you're fairly well spoken and at least have some kind of idea what kind of things you want to talk about within that very short time frame. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, just be honest, be candid, and be true to yourself, as well as making sure you're highlighting, what you have accomplished during your high school years. And so for the actual specific timeline, there are 2 application rounds. Round 1 runs from December 19th to February 28th. Of course, you can only apply to 1 undergraduate program and only submit 1 application at a time. And so that's the path that I personally chose without the written examination. But many of my friends actually took the written examination, and that's where you actually do have to sit for an exam, and there are several components that you'll be tested over. And it's actually one of the main ways that Peking University does recruit its undergraduates, but it can be slightly more intense because, it's just an additional exam that you do have to take. So the eligibility requirements are basically the same as if you were to take the pathway that doesn't require exams. But you might be wondering, what is the exam actually like? I believe the 3 main subjects that you'll be tested over are Chinese, English, and mathematics. From what I've heard from my friends, the Chinese part obviously actually for a lot of my friends was very easy because their mother tongue, their first language was Chinese, and so it was basically like if I were to take an English exam, obviously I'm going to do very well on it. But if your first language isn't Chinese, then it might be a little bit more challenging, I would say. But it's not something that is impossible, especially if you've already done the HSK6 and passed it fairly well. I do believe you still have to submit your HSK6 scores, even if you do the written examination pathway. And then the English, I think, was a little bit more difficult for some of my friends because their first language was Chinese. But I think it really depends on the person. And then in terms of math, I've heard that it was extremely difficult. I think I had a friend that got like a 30 or a 20 on the math portion, but I think because everyone just generally does not so great on the math, I think it's not as cutthroat in terms of like, oh, if you fail, then you're not going to be considered for the second part of the application process. And I wouldn't stress out too much about it, but it would be ideal, if you at least have some foundation in math and are able to solve certain things. But I don't think that you're not going to be able to make it to the second part if, for instance, you don't perform as ideally as you would have wanted on the math portion. Either way, for both parts, once you complete this first section and submit your scores or take the written exam, then you'll get the secondary interview. In this video, I'm not going to talk too much about the interview process because it would make for a very long video, but essentially there's going to be a couple of panelists, and then there will be other, it's like a group interview where you are with other people. And so I would say overall, I didn't really prepare too much for it, but you know, I passed the interview. It's just important though that you know that there is one so that you know you can mentally prepare yourself, I would say. And of course, like most, if not all college applications, there is a fee that you do have to pay to apply to the university. I don't remember the exact amount, but I don't believe that it was a super huge amount. I think it was probably cheaper than applying to universities in the US. So the application fee, I believe, was around 800 RMB, which I know is not a small amount, but it's, you know, if you want to apply, that's kind of what you have to invest in to get their overall return. You know, they say that higher investments, higher risk, higher return. There are also certain scholarships that you can apply to, and I personally, because I didn't actually think that I was going to attend Peking University beforehand, so it was a relatively last minute decision, and so I hadn't applied to the scholarships that they had available because the timelines and the deadlines had already passed. But there are several scholarships that you can apply to, which are also listed on the website, so you can check that out if you'd like to know more about that. And I can also make another video going into more detail about what scholarships are offered if you guys would like. But once you get admitted, you have to go through the visa process and arrive on campus for the actual enrollment procedure. But after that, once you've been admitted and gone through the entire visa enrollment process, then you are attending Peking University. Yeah! So that's essentially how I got into Peking University. Looking back, choosing PKU was probably not the obvious choice, or maybe not even the safest or best choice by conventional standards. I had the option to study in the US at some very decent universities, but I think for me it wasn't necessarily about the prestige or the stability. I have always been someone that likes to, you know, try out new things and sometimes take on a little bit of risk, because with more risk there is more opportunity, and that was one reason why I really wanted to attend Peking University, because I knew that by applying and attending, I would be putting myself in an environment that challenges me personally, academically, and culturally. And honestly, I do feel like studying at PKU has kind of changed and shaped how I see the world from a broader perspective. And so if you're thinking about applying to PKU, my biggest piece of advice would be, don't just think about how to get in. Think about what kind of person you will become if you actually do apply and attend. Think about what you're trying to achieve by attending a university in China and maybe following a not so conventional path. In any case, if you guys would like to follow me on my journey as a Peking University student, or would like to improve your Chinese, because I do language learning videos on this channel, please consider subscribing. Consider leaving a like if you found this video helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.